Good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to be with you. Thank you so much, Scott. I feel so humbled after these two fantastic presentations today. Thank you very much. But I'm going to invite you to look at Earth a little bit. And I want to look at biodiversity specifically. And I'm going to try and see if I can make some connections between what is happening to biodiversity today and also environmental justice, human well-being, and sustainability. We've seen some beautiful illustrations of other planets. I think you will agree with me that this is a beautiful representation of some aspects of nature or biodiversity on this planet. This is a seasonally dry tropical forest. This is a tricky forest that pretends to be like a desert in the dry season, and then it transforms itself and pretends to be a tropical rainforest. You can imagine the beauty and fascination of understanding what plants and animals and microbes do to be able to live in these two planets, more or less. But the reason why I wanted to start with that is because I was born in that area, Morelos, Mexico, and these forests used to be omnipresent in where I used to live. And I was fascinated by them. I could go out and climb trees, collect fruit, chase insects, and even large mammals and so on. Unfortunately, as it's happening everywhere on the planet, this amazing dry forest, which used to be like that, is undergoing this tremendous deforestation. And this is not unique to Morelos and Mexico. This is happening all over the planet. And I became fascinated by it, but at the same time preoccupied, because I was initially an evolutionary ecologist. I wanted to understand how plants and animals evolve together. They co-evolve. But then I realized that if I didn't do anything about the conservation of these places, I would not have anything to study. And so I became interested in looking at the global environmental changes that are impacting biological diversity. I am totally with you when I see that the new school and scientific elements in general and society consider climate the sexiest global environmental change, and I agree it's a fantastic, critical, fundamental problem, but it's not the only one. There are other critical global environmental changes, land use change, and the synergies of those changes with other changes. For example, land use change interacts with overexploitation dramatically. There's pollution, there's a population problem, and there's a cause and effect situation, which is the loss of biological diversity. Some scientists are arguing that we're moving into the sixth major poles of extinction in the Phanerozoic, in the last 550 million years. I want to talk specifically about land use change because I think that at this moment, that is the most critical element of the loss of biological diversity, with statistics like what you see there. Okay, fortunately, to assess deforestation, we have this fantastic technology, remote sensing tools, satellite imagery, and so on and so forth. And that allows to use this metric, deforestation, the amount of area lost at a given time from one time to another, and that indicates very vividly to us the loss and decline of planet life. And with that technology, you can do things, beautiful things or impressive things such as this. This is a Global Forest Watch illustration of what closed canopy forests must have been 8,000 years ago. And this is interesting because this is when humans were moving around the planet, so that was a more or less conserved situation of our forests at the time. Now, knowing the rates of deforestation and the spatial temporal patterns, we can project in business as usual. They projected that very soon, the forests are going to be left to those polygons that you see there. I totally understand that you might say, there's going to be some other green in some other areas. There has to be some other green in some other areas. And indeed, there's going to be some other green in other areas. But that green is going to be the transformation of these forests, such as this beautiful place, in which you will find about 360 different tree species in a hectare. A hectare is roughly a football field, a proper football field, converted into something in which the diversity is one species, the old palm. And so we have a situation where we are creating these agroscapes of monocultures, green deserts. For example, the oil palm plantations. I am aware of the fact that you probably are familiar with this phenomenon taking place in Southeast Asia dramatically, but it's moving around the planet, the tropical areas of the planet, including one of the most prestigious countries in terms of being careful and mindful about biological diversity and conservation of nature and rainforest, Costa Rica. If you go to the Osa Peninsula, which I recommend, it's a beautiful place, there's a lot of oil palm plantations already proliferating in that amazing area. All monoculture plantations bring a bunch of problems with them. One of them is the loss of biodiversity, the transformation of those beautiful forests into these monocultures. But there's a number of problems on environmental justice, really serious problems of environmental justice, and of course, a significant number of problems in terms of human well-being. I will not have the time to go into this in detail today, but I just wanted to tell you how I am using this to try and understand myself this critical topic of environmental justice and the conservation of biodiversity. It is going to be very difficult to change the mentality of people around the planet in terms of stopping this and do some other things, but I'm trying. And in fact, I am trying to do this with the participation of local people in the Osa Peninsula in Costa Rica. So I'm running an experiment to test this dramatic change in this mechanism of doing agriculture, which is a transformation of monoculture to biodiversified polycultures. It's kind of a crazy thing. Nobody wants to even think about that, transforming those productive, very productive and engaging and lucrative for some people, monocultures of oil palm, to transform them into diversified polycultures. I am doing an experiment, a real experiment. I am doing plantations with two treatments, monocultures and diversified plantations. How am I doing the diversification? That's based on the interaction with the local people, and I have an experiment in which I have monocultures with palm, banana, cacao, timber trees, and vanilla. This was co-designed with the local people, and you see some of those families there. And we collectively are examining three kinds of questions. One is on biodiversity and ecosystem processes, another one, environmental justice, and another one, human well-being. As I said, I don't have the time to go into those details because I want to talk about other projects in a minute, but let me just mention about the experimental design or the design of this study. Obviously, you want to have monocultures and diversified plantations. And instead of me doing a random location of a number of monocultures in the landscape and a random distribution of polycultures in the landscape, I am doing paired sites. So one side representing a monoculture and the other side representing a polyculture. And that pair is replicated through the landscape. And I think that's a very rigorous statistical design because almost everything is the same between the two treatments. You have the same climate, the same insects, the same conditions, the same soil, right? And everything is the same except that one is a monoculture, the other one is a polyculture. We started this project about 6 years ago. At year 3, the situations look like that. This is a polyculture, this is a monoculture. This is a photo taken with a fisheye lens from the bottom to the canopy. You can begin to see the differences there. We have collected a lot of detail on those, a lot of data on those three aspects, but I will not have time to go into that. Let me just mention, to finish this little section here, that when we started this experiment, we were dreaming about the possibility of an agricultural metamorphosis, changing those horrible monocultures into something that would look like this: palms, bananas, cacao, timber trees, and so on. That dream of some 6 years ago is looking good, actually. This is Akiko Yamasaki and her daughters planting cacao plants at the time, with Diego there, one of our assistants in the field there. And this is now, July last year, this is Diego, and this is the place now. This is looking like a mini forest there. We're doing the economics, we're doing the trade-offs as to what happens if we introduce other crops and we reduce the production of the oil. What are the trade-offs in terms of the economics, in terms of the benefits, a bunch of details that I will not have to talk to you about now, but I'll be happy to chat later on. Unfortunately, this question of land use change not only affects plant life, but also affects animal life. As you can see, these horrendous photos of animals facing the situation of transformation of the forest into monocultures like oil palm plantations. There's a synergy between land use change and a bunch of other very dramatic things that we do on the planet to our biodiversity, such as illegal trading, roads, trafficking, these horrendous things like the ivory trade, and so on and so forth. For those reasons, although we do not have satellite imagery to measure this kind of problem, we are beginning to try and understand that situation. To the point that in my lab, we're also using an equivalent term to address the situation of wildlife or fauna, and we use the term similar to deforestation, we use defaunation to indicate the loss of and decline of animal life. As I said, we don't have satellite imagery that allows us to examine this in detail, but we can do a lot of field work and a lot of modeling and data processing and so on and so forth. I will not bother you with the details, but we're using the LPI index, the Live Planet Index, to calculate decline of animals in global databases. What you have here is, over the last 4 decades, the decline in abundance of vertebrates. And what I want to draw your attention to is the situation, the global situation, which is the gray line there. When you break down into different regions of the planet, and you see in the case of the tropics, you have this decline of about 50%. In the last 4 decades, vertebrates have declined in their local abundance by about 50%. Right there, that contrast there, in and of itself represents a question of environmental justice that you might be thinking about. This is the situation of vertebrates. In that paper, we also began to analyze the situation of invertebrates. And here's an example. This is the moths and butterflies, and this is the other invertebrates. Also a very dire situation in terms of the abundance of insects today. People are talking about the insect collapse or the insect Armageddon, those kinds of things. And you begin to imagine how critical this might be in terms of the processes and the functions and the benefits we get from these kinds of organisms. Okay, so before I move on to that topic, what are the consequences of that? Let me mention another component that we have understood now in research on defaunation, is that process is not homogeneous across animal taxa, animal species. It depends on animal traits and human preferences, and so we are creating now a situation where some animals are benefited and some other animals are being impacted dramatically. So we have a situation of losers and winners. Let me use an example from the Brazilian Amazon. Here you have a gradient of no impact, low, medium, and high in terms of impact on animal life, and looking at the abundance and biomass of those animals in the Brazilian Amazon. And what you see is the logical thing that you would imagine. These two metrics, biomass and abundance, are declining, logical. But this is what is happening to species which have a biomass, a weight of 5 kilos or more. If you look at animals that have a biomass of less than 1 kilogram, it's not only that there is no effect, but actually the abundance and biomass are increasing dramatically. So what we're seeing here is a shift in the composition, in the organization of animal communities, whereby we have a contingent of animals that are the losers and a contingent of animals that are winners. Unfortunately for us, the winners, and it has to do with biomass, the group of the winners includes one major taxonomic group on the planet today, which is rodents. It's the most rich in species group of animals, and they carry many, many, many pathogenic diseases. So we have a world in which we're creating wonderful conditions for them, and at the same time they're critical for us. So the last question I want to examine, and then quickly show you a couple of details about this, is this question, that healthy ecosystems, flora and fauna, provide services, and you're all familiar with these kind of services, including this. The question is disease control a service of zoologically healthy ecosystems? Kind of a big question, and for that I'm going to invite you to Africa now for one moment, because Africa is a major wildlife loss hotspot, as you can see in that horrible slide. At the same time, Africa is a major hotspot of emerging and re-emerging diseases. The white pixels is what you want to pay your attention to, and you can see that Africa is really, really bad in that situation. Again, an environmental justice problem. In that place, how can we address the situation? What happens if we are losing the big animals? We're using experimental manipulations such as this. This is an electrified fence. There's a Homo sapiens, and you can see that this is roughly about 4 hectares. This is replicated in space. So we can compare defaunated locations versus control plots. And you can see the difference there in terms of the ecology of the savanna. And to make a long story short, what happens there is that in the absence of the big animals, we see an abundance of almost 3 times the abundance of rodents. For every single species of rodent that we catch, we do a number of things, such as collecting the ectoparasites, collecting some blood. All of this is done with students, always, really very important. In addition to that, we work with the local communities, we engage them, and they're actually becoming, in some senses, the advisors of myself, thanks to their traditional ecological knowledge. And then we do another collaboration with the CDCs, the Centers for Disease Control. We take all the samples of the blood and the ectoparasites, fleas, ticks, and so on and so forth. And they do the molecular analysis to discover horrible things as what you see here. You will recognize some of them probably, including this one. This is the bacterium of plague pest, which is present in some rodents today. The point is that all of these diseases are present in these animals, and we are increasing the abundance of these animals by about 2.5 or 3 times more. This is just to show that in the case of this particular disease, we do indeed have more animals, rodents infected with that disease, and more fleas infected with that disease. Imagine a farmer having to do some work in their farms in Africa, coming into contact with these animals. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and I wanted to finish by saying that there's a number of things that we should be doing as a collective society: reduce and stop the loss of the habitat, reduce land use change, reduce the destruction of the habitat for the reasons that I mentioned before. We should be able to control and stop the overexploitation of those animals. We have learned to do wonderful reforestation programs. Now we should be able to do refaunation programs. And of course, I am very clear that me being an ecologist, I am not going to be able to address these critical issues if I don't interact and have the help and participation of other disciplines, multi and interdisciplinary research and education. And that's one of the main reasons why I'm so excited about the new school and the possibilities of working with the new school and with many of you in this program. This is not Photoshop, this is a real photo showing what I wanted to finish with, biodiversity in wildlife. These organisms are not only decoration of the planet. After 3.5 billion years of evolution, we have these beautiful decorations, but they're critical for ecosystem functioning and sustainability, going from inspiration to human health. Thank you.